Hey everybody, meteorologist Brad Panovich here. It is the ski forecast for the middle of the week, and I'm going to start with the good news first. We're going to start with the best news in maybe a week or so, and it's right here. Snowmaking. This is Beech Mountain right now from our friends at Resort Cams. They are cranking out the snow, and this is happening all across the southeast as cold temperatures are finally back. That's the good news. We finally have cold air in place. So I'm going to start with the 5-day forecast first here, and you could see first 2 days, Thursday, Friday, we're going to have potential snowmaking, maybe 24-hour snowmaking, just not nighttime snowmaking, but pretty good event to make snow and get things ready for the weekend. Now, you notice I don't have any snowmaking or natural snow after Saturday and Sunday. It doesn't mean there might be some windows, especially in a few of the cold spots on Saturday, Sunday morning, but it's a warming trend. So it doesn't look like we're going to have good snowmaking or any natural snow to talk about really in the short term. And I'll show you real quickly the first day of meteorological winter, which is awesome. December 1st is here. Snowfall forecast for the next 10 days. Not a lot of natural snow. But let's get into the pattern, because if you're like me, and I know there's a lot of snow weenies and people that love talking about long range forecast, and you start hearing a lot about the negative NAO, teleconnections, negative Arctic oscillations, polar vortex weakening, all those great terms that get thrown around by some great long range forecasters. I will tell you, having done this for now 25 years, the thing that you don't often hear from people is that, yes, these pattern recognitions of cold air moving out of the Arctic are pretty good. The thing you don't hear enough about is the location of that cold air is really difficult, if not impossible, to forecast. When we see weakening of the polar vortex or blocking going on, there's cold air coming out of the Arctic. The real question isn't that there's cold air coming south. It's where is it going? Is it going into the western U.S.? Is it going into the central U.S., maybe just eastern Canada? Heck, it could be going over into Siberia and Europe. Because remember, the top of the world, I know it seems weird when you think about the Arctic, think about the cold air as kind of like water on a ball. When it spills on top, it's hard to tell where it's going to drip off. So it's going to move, and we see those indications of that polar vortex weakening and drifting south, at least a chunk of it, into eastern Canada. So that's a great sign. We'd love to see that as a snow and ski lover, and if you want cold temperatures. But there's also a giant ridge over the south, which kind of keeps us in no man's land. That's not a great setup for winter weather. It's a good storm track. It's just not cold enough. So as we go later into the period, we're going to go out here to next Thursday, and something strikes my attention in this map here, and it might grab your attention as well. I'm going to move the map here a little bit. Let me play it just for a second. You could see that ridging over Greenland. This is what we call blocking, or the North Atlantic oscillation going negative. So that typically, this is warm air surging up into the Arctic. This seems really weird, and this is why people often are confused by this. The warmer it is in the Arctic, the colder it is south, because what happens is warm air gets pushed north, it displaces the cold air. And look at a tons going into Europe and Asia, a little piece coming into Western Canada, but there's a little chunk coming into Eastern Canada. Sometimes when we see this setup, we can get cold air and storminess to come down the East Coast, and that's like paradise for snow lovers. But it's a big if. The Arctic is not the same as it used to be. If you look back at teleconnections and some of these parameters we used to use 20, 25, 30 years ago, the Arctic had a whole much more ice. The ice cover would be all over the place. And so when the cold air came south, it tended to spill everywhere. Now, because there's not much up there, it comes down in these tiny little chunks. And so it's not always the same setup that we've had in the past. Some of the analog years from the 70s, 80s, and 90s aren't applicable to today, because the Arctic was a completely different animal back then than it is now. But it does say that, it does show, at least when we start seeing ridging like this, and even over Alaska, if we move it over to the Gulf of Alaska, look at that ridging going on there. So when you see these big ridges jumping up into the Arctic, you tend to see cold air spilling south. You see a chunk there. Let's go around the globe, though. Look at where the heart of this cold air is going. This is what I'm talking about. Everybody, oh, cold air is coming south. Yeah, into China, Tibet, Eastern Asia, Siberia, maybe not the U.S. So if we go to the top of the world, that cold air is moving. And you can see there are some chunks trying to come into North America, but the bulk of this, the polar vortex displacement, is heading into Asia, at least on the long range guidance. So now that can change. We know it's moving. Hopefully this will swing over the US and give us a better setup. But for everyone hearing about these long range pattern changes, yeah, something's going to happen middle of the month. We just don't know if it's going to be our lucky time to get it in the southeast. But at least it's there. I mean, there's been times where we haven't had any of that. So we'll keep an eye on this pattern going into next weekend. But in the short term, great snowmaking Thursday, Friday. Start getting excited. Hopefully this pattern comes together and we see a bunch of cold air and storminess on the East Coast. But I'll be honest with you, that it's hard to do that early in the season. December is not the greatest month for snow for us. If it was late December, yes. January, February, March, yes. That's the time frame. So we'll see how it unfolds. But right now, we just need cold air so we can make snow. That's what we're hoping for. As always, everybody, think snow. And if you're hitting the slopes this week and have a great time, looks like the snowmakers are tearing it up right now.